these are like some of the most serious theft charges you can get. We don't know how much more than $1 million. We just know it was more than $1 million. It worked for at least 2 years. So, I mean, it begs the question, how did Nike not know about this? And how did this go on for so long?
And when did they find out?
This is a Fox 12 podcast.
Welcome to Beyond the Broadcast, the podcast where we go behind the scenes on Fox 12 stories that reporters here have been working on and see what it took to get these stories to air. I'm investigative reporter Spencer Schott, and I'm joined this week by my fellow investigative reporter, Ward Jollis. Ward, thanks for hopping on today. This is a very interesting case that you've been working on that is happening actually really close to a company really close to the station.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this is Nike. It's right down the road from us, and it's one that even if you don't live close to the station, you know about this company. And this involves a classic kickback scheme, which for people who don't know, involves someone on the inside who is secretly profiting off of certain business deals. So it's very elaborate, and I'm super excited to get into it.
Let's take a look.
John Griffith wasn't just any Nike employee. For nearly 2 decades since 2007, he held one of the most powerful behind-the-scenes roles at the sportswear giant. His title, Global Brand Marketing, Music Supervision, Strategy, and Licensing. In plain terms, Griffith was the person at Nike who decided which music vendors got hired and how much they got paid. That position of trust, prosecutors say, became the foundation of a scheme that would drain more than $1 million from Nike over more than 2 years. Here's how it allegedly worked. Griffith's friend Brad Mosier ran a music licensing consultancy called Good Measure LLC. Good Measure had just one client, Nike. And prosecutors say Griffith, sitting inside Nike, would set inflated prices for Mosier's company to bill the sportswear giant. Nike would then pay those inflated bills, unaware that its own employee had rigged the prices. Then Mosier would funnel roughly half of the money back to Griffith through a shell company Griffith had quietly created called Quiver and Bow LLC. Prosecutors say the scheme ran from June of 2020 to December of 2022, with at least 11 separate fraudulent transactions, each involving $50,000 or more. In May, a Washington County grand jury indicted both men on 24 felony counts each, including racketeering, aggravated theft, and money laundering. Racketeering, typically associated with organized crime, requires prosecutors to prove not just that a crime was committed, but that the defendants operated as part of an organized criminal enterprise. That's exactly what Washington County prosecutors are alleging here. Nike is seeking full restitution and told Fox 12 on Friday that Griffith left Nike in 2022, just as the alleged scheme was ending. They also pushed back on how Griffith's role has been described, saying he was, quote, not an executive, but instead a business affairs associate.
Instead of Horgan versus Musher.
On Friday, Griffith's alleged co-conspirator Brad Mosier made his first appearance before a judge. His attorney, Chris Haywood, says Mosier is now cooperating with police. Griffith's attorney, on the other hand, responded to the allegations with a different tone, saying, quote, Griffith's work for Nike has been highly successful. He's proud of what he's accomplished for the brand, both as an employee and a vendor, over their long association. Meanwhile, the Washington County District Attorney has filed a motion to combine both cases into a single joint trial, arguing that the charges against Griffith and Mosier are so intertwined that separating them would be contrary to Nike's interest as a victim. A judge has not yet ruled if these cases will be joined, but Griffith remains out on bail. He's barred from being within 150 yards of Nike, and he's also barred from having any contact whatsoever with Brad Mosier. Reporting in Hillsborough, I'm Ward Jollis, Fox 12 Oregon.
So when people think of Nike, they think of shoes, athletic wear. They don't necessarily think of
Music, right?
And so tell us a little bit about the guy on the inside. What is his job at Nike if it's not dealing with like the textiles that they normally deal with?
Yeah. I mean, definitely that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback I've gotten is like, what? Nike makes music? What? Or they handle music? No. I mean, when you think about Nike as a company, I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar company. They have a lot of moving parts and different assets. One of the key parts of their company is the music department. And that's because under any ad or under any promo or campaign or anything, a lot of times we're dealing with music. That music has to be licensed from somewhere. So when we're talking about this guy who is on the inside, right, his name is John Griffith. He goes by JT. He worked at Nike for more than 2 decades. Or actually, let me rephrase that, for just under 2 decades. And while he was there, he was the guy who was in charge, essentially, of deciding which music vendors got paid, how much, and which ones were selected, which contracts were signed, right? And that's kind of where this entire scheme allegedly unfolded. He was setting prices for vendors on the outside for contracts for music with Nike.
Yeah, so Ward, there's a lot of moving parts, lots of names, lots of businesses from Nike to this LLC to a separate LLC. Paint us a picture of kind of how does this racketeering case work?
Essentially, what these prosecutors are now alleging that he did was he secretly was giving his friend on the outside, Brad Mosier, lucrative music deals, right, that were way overinflated price-wise. So say he's like, yeah, Nike will hire you for $20,000 if you produce this music for us, even though the real price of whatever that would be is more like 10, 15. Then this guy does what he's supposed to do, but he secretly takes half of it and funnels it back to our guy who was working at Nike through a shell company that is owned by Griffith. The only client that his company had was Nike, and the only person he was working with was Griffith. And Griffith was sitting here giving him money for years through this company, and then he was funneling it back through a third-party company owned by Griffith. So
he's getting a kickback. He is inflating the prices to make sure that he's lining his own pockets, essentially.
Essentially, that's what prosecutors are saying was happening. And this went on for more than 2 years before anybody found out about it.
So he's been with the company for nearly 2 decades, you said. At what point was Nike able to find out, oh, we're paying a lot more for this music than we do, or we did 2 years ago, or however long ago?
And that's one of the big questions. We just don't know. One of the biggest questions that's still out there right now about this entire case is like, this went on for more than 2 years, allegedly. How did Nike find out about this? You know, how did this go on for so long without somebody noticing? That's a big question. We just don't know, you know?
And it also comes down to the investigation of sometimes they might know about it earlier, but they let it go on for a while to make sure that they have evidence for their case. So do you think that's something that happened here, of they might have found out about it a year ago and then just kind of tracked it for a year to see if that money would come back to their employee, Griffith?
Something tells me that that is the case. And when I say something, I mean something very specific that we found when digging into this case, right? So the big reason why there's a lot of I don't know or we don't know yet in this case is because it's active. And prosecutors are not going to reveal all of the evidence they have in a case before it goes to trial. That's very typical, right? We know that. Well, in this specific scenario, one of the things that we found when looking into this is that these two guys who were involved, right, we did like background checks on them and whatnot, and we're wondering how are they connected. Well, the indictment actually lists a third co-conspirator. Okay, I don't
Not named.
He is named.
Okay.
Which is the weird part about this is like there's a third co-conspirator named in the indictment. And that's the big question here is who is this third guy? And why is he involved in this somehow? And one thing that's really interesting about all of this is that 7 weeks prior to the grand jury indictment, so the grand jury meets, they decide to indict these two men. 7 weeks prior, Mosier was starting a brand new music licensing company with this third co-conspirator. Online records show that. So the question is like, what were they going to do with that company, you know, before this indictment came out? And did they even know about this criminal case that was being built against them?
Did they know they were being investigated?
Months, years. They probably didn't. Is the conclusion that you can maybe pull from that is that like these guys were doing music licensing stuff, you know, behind the scenes, just 7 weeks before this grand jury indictment came down.
So that raised the question then, if he was a witness, was he given a immunity deal of some sort? Is that disclosed in these documents?
It's not. And that's why this is such an interesting case that still has a lot of moving parts. And there's definitely going to be legs with this. Is like there's a lot of names that are dropped here. There's obviously lots of different things that prosecutors are looking at or have looked at that remain sealed, right, until this goes to trial. One of which is the identity of this third person and how that person is involved in all this and why that third person, despite being named as a co-conspirator, has not been charged. It's interesting because there's, like I said, there's these 3 guys that are named. They're all being treated very differently by prosecutors in this case. And the question is, how did this look? How did it work? How much money was involved? All the prosecutor's office says is that it was more than $1 million. We don't know how much more than $1 million. We just know it was more than $1 million. So, I mean, this went on for a couple of years, Nike is involved in billions of dollars in business deals every year. And so I think that as the case moves on, we're going to get a better idea of who these characters are, how much money was allegedly stolen, and what the nature of this scheme was beyond just this very simple surface level kickback scheme that we've been talking about.
And so with the restitution that Nike is asking for, do we have a dollar amount of how much they're asking for? And does that give a hint of how much they lost through this scheme?
No, like I said, all we have there are multiple counts. I believe, and I would have to check, but both of these two men who were named as co-conspirators are facing a ton of charges right now. I want to say it's like 24. Okay, so that's like 24 instances where Nike has them, or prosecutors, I should say, prosecutors have them allegedly stealing from the company, right? So this went on for many different times, it seems like, over the course of 2 years. And we know that in each case, a certain dollar amount plus was stolen. That there has to be a certain level that is reached in stolen money to get certain charges.
From misdemeanor to felony,
Absolutely.
et cetera.
Yeah, and we know that these are like some of the most serious theft charges you can get. In fact, like we hear this one charge that both of these men are facing, racketeering, which is one that is very rare. People do not see this charge very often in court. And that is because for a prosecutor to prove that racketeering happened, they have to prove that there was some kind of organized criminal dynamic that was going on in order to charge someone with that. So the fact that you even have a racketeering charge against these two men suggests that these charges are very serious and that this was likely a pretty large dollar amount.
And a very organized
Yes,
criminal
absolutely.
network for this. And so they have the racketeering charges against them. Can you explain how racketeering is different than embezzlement, which is the charge you see more often?
Yeah, well, I mean, racketeering, again, it has to deal with this organized criminal dynamic, right? I mean, you are going to see racketeering when it comes to multi-layered theft schemes, right? Not something of just a case of, pocketing a little bit of the money that you're bringing in for a company. This is a very sophisticated, more complex way of stealing is the way prosecutors would see it. They see this as, think about all the companies that were involved in this, right? I mean, you have like Nike, the employee who was dealing with the contracts. Then you got your outside who's running his own company who is getting the contracts. And then the money, half of the money that company makes is then being funneled through another company back to our guy inside of Nike who owns that company. So like you have lots of different LLCs that have been created that look like they're very deliberate. Without the exact details of the case, I can't tell you specifically why, but I can tell you that racketeering, it's a high bar to reach. You have to prove that there was some kind of organized criminal dynamic going on. And the fact that charge has even been brought forward and a grand jury returned an indictment on it suggests that there's a lot of evidence that this was a very organized dynamic here.
Yeah, so Ward, how did this case get on our radar?
Okay, so that is a good question because we have a source that I would say that is very close to the investigation that we cannot disclose who this person is. But before this kind of case began to unfold, this specific source called me and told me about this case and the charges involved. I was able to take that tip and see that, yes, charges had been filed, but we didn't really know the details very much. So I began kind of discussions with the Washington County District Attorney's Office, and they were able to give me some basic details of this case that laid out some basic facts. And then they were able to give me a heads up on when hearings were happening and when filings were coming. And as this little trickle of information came down in the information as this legal process really started, we were able to slowly put together this larger story and make what seemed like a very vague indictment into a more complex story that kind of paints a clearer picture of what was going on, what prosecutors believe was happening.
So what started as a tip led to a question, which led to looking at where you're going to find these documents, and those documents led to the larger story that we put together here.
Yes, and a lot more questions. I mean, there's a lot of information that we've gained from these court documents, but one of the tricky things about really complex criminal cases like this, especially ones that are kept so airtight, is that details come out little by little, and until it really goes to trial, we won't know the full scope of what really happened behind the scenes here officially.
And we've mentioned a few times that Nike is the victim in this case.
Yeah.
They are the one looking for restitution, but they are a billion-dollar company. We're
Mhm.
talking about millions of dollars here, so much less than what they make overall. Why go through all this trouble to prosecute two guys who were funneling some money away from the company? Like, why do you think Nike is going after this so much?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I know that from our own conversations with sources that are close to this investigation, we know that Nike tried to resolve this issue quietly before criminal charges were brought, right? So apparently that didn't happen because now the district attorney's office is involved. This was originally a case of Nike is trying to work this out with employees. It seems like that's what our sources tell us. And when they couldn't come to some kind of agreement, they then took it to the court. Now, what that looked like, I can't tell you, but because we just simply don't know what Nike and these men were doing behind the scenes. But you can argue that Nike is a multi-billion-dollar company and they've got plenty of money to throw around, but we also don't know the exact finite amount of the money that is allegedly stolen. We just know it was more than $1 million.
And we don't know if they were trying to target other smaller companies who couldn't afford to handle a blow like this. Like Nike can kind of take this blow but still keep going as a company. If they were targeting like a smaller mom and pop company, they could go under because of something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Nike's got more power for sure than other companies if they were going through something similar like this. But, that's also what makes this scheme so interesting and so probably attractive to the people who were involved in this is that they knew there was a lot of money in this company that they could siphon off and maybe do this quietly, right? And if these men that are being charged did everything that is being alleged against them, it worked for at least 2 years, right? I mean, this was a ton of transactions that were processed by this man and this other guy on the outside over several years, So, I mean, it begs the question, how did Nike not know about this? And how did this go on for so long?
And when did they find out?
We know he left the company in 2022 and that these charges were brought in 25. Or not 25, 26. I'm forgetting the year now. But the question is when did Nike know? How did they not know for so long? And why are we just now hearing about this? I'm sure all that's going to come out as this case goes on.
And so as we follow this, there's a lot of unknowns right now. A lot of questions of how this happened, why this happened, how much money was stolen. But as we follow it going forward, why do you think this is a case that is grabbing people's attention? Why are people paying so much attention to a racketeering money laundering case that might not grab as much attention otherwise?
Yeah. We've got these two everyday guys that are funneling tons of money away from a company seemingly undetected for a long period of time. And then I think the other thing that makes it interesting is just obviously the name recognition. Nike, it's such a big brand. People know when they hear Nike, that this is a multi-billion-dollar company based right here in our own backyard. And they want to know that those companies are being run well, and that the people who are in charge are being held accountable. And so this is an accountability case, but it's also just naturally interesting for us to hear about these elaborate criminal conspiracies and how they came to be, right? Like, we're asking all these questions now, like, how did Nike not know about this? How did this go on for so long? This seems so simple, right? I mean, it's like he literally just gave money to his friend and his friend gave it back to him through a shell company. How did that go on for so long? I think those are a lot of questions that are going to be answered as this goes on for however long. It could be years. But it's that white collar crime that, just piques people's interest sometimes. That's why you see so much about it.
Yeah, Ward, thank you for breaking all of these different parts down. It's a lot of moving parts, a lot of unanswered questions still, so I'm sure we'll continue to follow this. And thank you for watching Beyond the Broadcast. Be sure to tune back in next week where we sit down with another reporter and dive into their story. Thanks for watching.
This has been a Fox 12 podcast. For more content like this, download the Fox 12 app to your phone or any connected device, like your Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Smart TV.